Hello, and welcome to PAN. I'm Philip Johnson. The discourse on the budget ceiling continues to move circularly. It has been reported on some networks that Republican staffers believe that the standoff may last at least a few more days, taking the U.S. past the October 1st deadline. Members of the House have been engaged in heated debate for the past few days, but in reality, for the past couple years, as last month marks the one-year anniversary of the U.S. downgrade from AAA by S&P. What has been accomplished since then is still unclear, as the U.S. government's top legislative body has yet to come to a conclusion. As of today, it looks as if the only resolution that may come out of the discourse on Capitol Hill will be another kick of the can further down the road. The current obstacle to that progress, if you ask House Republicans, seems to be the Affordable Care Act, which has been socially renamed Obamacare by Republicans. This is the crucial element that Republicans are demanding to be placed on the table if there is to be a negotiation and eventually a new budget. House Democrats think that is beside the point.
We are here in the Capitol awaiting a decision by the Republicans in the House about the next step to deal with the fiscal crisis they have created. It's not really that complicated. The Monday deadline approaches to continue the operation of the federal government with a shutdown looming because the Republicans have refused to work on a bipartisan basis to resolve the funding issues. The centerpiece of the rhetoric has been objection to the Affordable Care Act and their childish insistence that a program that has been approved by Congress, President Obama re-elected defending, and validated by the Supreme Court, that somehow this bell can be unrung. Billions have already been spent. Hundreds of thousands of people are working to make the reform operational, and it seems to be working. Better prescription drug benefits for senior citizens are putting more money in their pocket. Children under the age of 26 have been able to stay on their parents' policies. Beginning Tuesday, enrollment starts for the exchanges, and on January 1st, it goes live with better health insurance. People can't be refused insurance for pre-existing conditions. There will be no lifetime limits on benefits. Health insurance will be more affordable with subsidies for millions, and there will be more competition for all. These provisions are overwhelmingly supported by the American public. The health insurance program will save billions of dollars for the federal government, reducing the deficit. That's the judgment of the CBO. In fact, isn't it ironic that having campaigned against these health care savings and losing, Paul Ryan and the Republicans include those very savings in their budget? How are Democrats supposed to deal with the Republicans as they up the ante, seeking to damage the American people by cutting off vital services in a shutdown? How do you deal with Republicans who are willing to default on paying Americans' debt, breaking our moral and legal obligations, and risking not just America's, but the world's economy?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the President yet again chose to bash Congress and blame the House Republicans for the failure of America's economy. I've seen him make this argument on television many times, but he never shows up on Capitol Hill to actually engage in productive conversations. He does talk, however, to the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians. With the addition of Obamacare, the government now comprises 1/6 of the nation's economy. This is a complete travesty, and the private sector must be given more control of health care, not the federal government.
It is this body that every single year meets our statutory duty and our constitutional duty to bring forward a budget that funds the operations of the United States of America. We do not miss our deadlines, and for the interest of my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, I will just walk through some of these points. One of the reasons they want it is because the President wants control of the checkbook. Right now, the U.S. House of Representatives has that control, and we want to keep it. We don't want a government shutdown. We want to keep the government open and keep cutting it. We want to keep the government open so we can delay, defund, repeal, and replace Obamacare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm happy this morning to be able to follow the rank partisan remarks of Ms. Blackburn, because I wanted to speak this morning on the subject of compromise. Compromise is not an easy subject to speak on because, of course, we all have it in our minds here that the right thing to do is to lead great ideological battles, to stand unbending by your principles, to stand up for what you think is right. And it is the right thing to do, to stand up for what you think is right. Compromise is a hard thing to discuss because, of course, those on the fringes, those on the extreme, those who are unbending will accuse us of not standing by our ideals if we compromise. But the fact is that most, if not all, of the accomplishments in the history of this country that have been achieved by the United States Congress have been achieved through compromise.
In other words, negotiation on this point amounts to an effective repeal of national referendum. This does sound very familiar. Back in 2012, the arguments surrounding taxes and the 1% were at the decentralized Occupy movement was reported to be leading the charge of reformists from all walks of life. People around the nation were occupying city centers and areas of public space in opposition of U.S. policies, and after much deliberation, the, quote, themeless movement had one: economic inequity.
Lead singer of the Village 21-7.
Yeah. So why are you here? What do you see this movement as?
I'm here because we are the 99%. When you look at the, such families as the Rothschilds and Vanderbilt and Rockefeller, these guys are the 1% that control the globe. But what they really don't understand is the rest of us. I mean, we make the world go round. We all stop working tomorrow. What do you think would happen? And these guys aren't after money. This is what I wish everybody would understand. They're not after money. It's power over other men. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Women. You know what I mean? And the ability to take away food and create conditions that perpetuate crime, perpetuate famine and poverty. It could be profit and peace. I mean, but they rather profit in war, profit in poverty. You know? And this is just another form of some kind of mass gentrification is going on, I guess. But like I was telling you, brother, there's a mass awakening going on, mass evolution, and consciousness level is being raised. We are the first to start it. And this will go on for the next 3 years until the whole world catches on and let go of this whole shackle of materialism and let go of all the things that they put to us as food, to us to like these zombies, feeding off of each other, you know what I mean, until we help one another, you know what I mean, actually come together and do what's right, and that's put our world back on track. If you don't have an earth, man, you won't have society, humanity, or anything. You know what I mean, human race, mankind, whatever you like to call it. We're fighting for that. You know what I mean? We're starting to occupy K Street. You know, they let these big wigs and these lobbyists know that no more paying our politicians, no more paying our lawmakers to abide by them, this private infrastructure. When we think about this Federal Reserve, is basically owned by those that 1%. So how in the world, you know what I'm saying? You know, they get tax cuts and stuff, and we walk around with no jobs to perpetuate this poverty, you know, these conditions so that we can run amok. But it won't happen if we come together, one, like my brothers and sisters here, coming together, realizing that that's going on. We can stop it. One person at a time, two person at a time, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100. I was out at the protest yesterday, no jobs, no cuts, you know, as not no longer a silent majority. I mean, everywhere you look, it's happening. Everywhere you look. And this is what we call the mass evolution, the mass consciousness level.
The Great Awakening.
That's right. It is happening. And, I mean,
at the same time, Tea Party activists were organizing on behalf of their constituents, rallying behind a decades-old anti-tax increase alliance with Americans for Tax Reform and Grover Norquist to prevent an increase in the tax burden of Americans, with a specific emphasis on the upper 1% earners. So the narrative continues. This time over the next pet peeve of the Republican Party, healthcare reform, an argument that many thought was at least one election behind us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I believe that Obama does in fact care. And that care is evidenced by the fact that we passed the most major piece of health legislation that we have done since the mid-1960s, since Medicare and Medicaid. And so it's amazing to me that I continue to hear colleagues in both the House and the Senate who are attempting to deny the existence of this legislation. Legislation that was passed by both houses of Congress, signed into law by the President of the United States of America, upheld by the Supreme Court, who says that it is indeed constitutional. And still there are colleagues trying to deny the existence of this law. That is amazing. As a matter of fact, it's real, it's passed, it's been affirmed, and it's going to stay.
The persistence and determination of right-wing extremists to, quote, turn back the clock on the Affordable Care Act will have consequences for the U.S. as a whole.
If sequestration goes into effect for the remainder of the year, it will require the Department of Defense to cut roughly $46 billion from the level of funding provided on the FY 2013 continuing resolution, all in the last 7 months of the fiscal year. By law, sequester would apply to all of the DoD budget, including wartime spending. The only exception is that the President has indicated his intent to exempt all military personnel funding from sequestration.
The across-the-board spending cuts will be detrimental to U.S. interests both domestically and around the world.
In the event of a lapse, all of our military personnel would be directed to remain on normal duty status. Their military status means they can't be placed in a non-pay status, so we would direct them to continue in normal duty status. Civilian workers who support these accepted activities, again, Afghanistan emergency activities, they would be directed to continue to work. But all other civilian workers who do not primarily support accepted activities would be placed in a non-duty, non-pay status on an emergency.
There has been around-the-clock coverage of this heated debate. Here at PAN, we have been following the story from another perspective. We are asking two questions. What is at stake for the average American, and why, for the sake of delaying or repealing the Affordable Care Act, would certain members of Congress risk what economists forecast to be a second economic collapse by not passing a new budget? I'm Philip Johnson. This is PAN.